So this phone costs just £199. Question is, how does a budget phone cope with a hard day's use in a city? Let's find out. So this phone is the TCL 40R 5G. If you've never heard of TCL before, they make some fairly interesting budget smartphones. Now everything you see in today's video will be shot on this phone, apart from the shots of the phone itself, obviously, because I had to use the iPhone 14 Pro Max for that. I'm just editing this now, and the mic is really struggling with those noisy, windy Birmingham streets. So from this point onwards, just to make it listenable, I have added a bit of noise reduction. Right, let's talk specs. And the 40R is basically a slightly upgraded version of the 40 SE. There's not much separating them though, to be honest. They've both got the same sort of screen, the same internals, the exact same camera system as far as I can tell. And the only difference really is the fact that this phone has 5G, which is quite a big deal, I suppose, but it is 60 quid more expensive. So in terms of the chip powering this thing, it's a MTK MT6833 Dimensity 700. It's also got 4 GB of RAM, 64 GB of storage. It's got a 6.6-inch HD Plus NXT Vision display, which is 90 Hz, goes down to 60 Hz, and there is some kind of automatic switching between the two. I am purposely walking through some very busy, noisy places just to give you an idea of what this mic's like. But in terms of the camera system, it's a triple AI-powered 50 megapixel camera. That's the main lens. There's also a depth lens and a macro. The thing to bear in mind with the camera system is that when it comes to video, it only shoots up to 1080p at 30 frames a second, so there's no 4K video, both on the rear camera and the selfie camera, which I'm talking into now. As for the rest of the specs, there's a 5000 milliamp hour battery, which has fast charging, 15 watts, and also has a battery preserve thing overnight where it, I think, trickle charges the phone basically. There's a fingerprint reader, there's facial recognition, and there's a headphone jack. So as far as performance is concerned, you can't expect much from that Dimensity 700 MTK 6833. It's a bit sluggish, I won't lie, although bear in mind I'm coming from an iPhone 14 Pro Max, an S23 Ultra. They are, as they should be, very quick phones. This one does stutter when you flip between apps occasionally, but it does get there eventually, and you have to keep reminding yourself that you've spent £200 on this thing, so you can't expect miracles. I think the key thing is because TCL haven't fiddled too much with Android still feels fairly decent and not too hindered by bloatware. When it comes to 5G speeds, pretty impressive actually. I managed to get 125 megabits per second down and 38 up. That is in the centre of Birmingham, to be fair. You can't really sniff at that. And that is, again, it's the main reason people will buy this phone over the 40 SE. The display isn't that bad actually. I think it's quite a decent size. It's about the same size roughly as an iPhone 14 Pro Max. It has that 90 Hz, which is nice and smooth. It's pretty sharp. You can see some of the, I suppose, cheaper components on certain images where the edges aren't particularly well rounded. And if you're interested, the resolution is 720 by 1612, so it's pretty low resolution actually, although like I say, you don't really notice that. The brightness, 400 nits, so not the brightest display in the world. And I have noticed today while I've been filming B-roll of this phone, there's a lot of reflections. You can see me basically filming myself quite a bit in this video. It seems to be like a very reflective panel. Overall, the display is, I think, good enough based on what you're paying. It's also worth noting that this phone doesn't have an official IP rating for water and dust resistance, and it looks like I might get to test that in a minute, but again, at this price range, you don't really expect that. I realise I've not talked much about build quality, and it's what you'd expect for £200. It's a bit plasticky, although I do like the look of it. It looks from afar, and if you don't actually hold it, it looks like a brushed sort of metal finish on the back, and it does feel quite light. I think given the price, the build quality is pretty good. Right, let's talk about this 50 megapixel camera, and I'm quite impressed actually. Some of the photos I've taken so far remind me of the Pixel, which is my favourite smartphone camera. They're quite contrasty, a bit processed, a little bit over-sharpened for my liking, but they're very close to Google's effort. There are two things to bear in mind though. One of them is that there is some shutter lag, which results in you taking more than one photo when you actually want to, and also it does have a tendency to blow out greens. It does very well with skies, so the shots where you've got a nice blue sky in the frame, it deals with them very well. The selfie camera is 8 megapixels and f2 for the aperture. It does need decent conditions, although I have thrown some fairly tricky light at it today, and it's dealt with it pretty well. There is a beautification feature with a slider, and it looks ridiculous. In terms of the video performance, I've tried to throw everything at this camera today, and the weather has really helped because it's been very sunny, which gives loads of light and dark areas, which is a brilliant test of any camera's dynamic range. You know, how quickly can it switch from a light scene to a dark scene, and how can it cope with scenes that have both very dark and very light elements? And it's not bad actually. As for the video quality overall, I'll have to let you be the judge of that for the moment because I've only seen it on this display on the phone, and on this it looks okay. There's just two things to bear in mind. One of them, as I mentioned earlier, is that this is only a 1080p camera. It doesn't do 4K. And secondly, the active image stabilization is just really strange. In fact, I'd go as far to say it's completely unusable on the selfie cam. As you can see in these demonstrations here, your whole face kind of contorts and just looks really, really odd. There are a couple of other camera features built into this phone which are interesting, but in practice I couldn't seem to get them to work very well. The first one is called AI color video, and this is when it basically makes the subject, well, it keeps the subject in color but makes the background black and white. And ideally you do this with portraits. I'm walking around on my own today, so it's tricky to do that, but I couldn't quite get it to work even with inanimate objects. It was a bit, I don't know, it just doesn't seem to do what it says on the tin. Then there's a feature called One Shot, which again is tricky to test today on my own, but it's meant for portraits really, or group photos, and it instructs you to take several angles. So basically you press the shutter button and it gives you between 5 and 15 seconds to get different angles of the photo, and then it picks the best photo out of the bunch. The one thing I would say about those features though is that they are marketing tools really. That doesn't matter, they have to do this to, like I say, differentiate themselves. Thumbs up to TCL for doing this stuff because it's interesting. I'm sure you can get good results out of it. On to battery life, and as mentioned earlier, it's got a 5000 milliamp hour battery, which isn't bad to be honest, and TCL tell us we can get about 2 days from it. Now this morning it came off the charger at 6:30 AM. It's now 10 past 3 and I've got 25% remaining. The thing to bear in mind is I've really been hammering this phone today, so loads of photos, loads of video, the screen's been on all the time basically, and loads of GPS use. But if TCL are saying 2 days, then we'll give them the benefit of the doubt, to be honest. And also, whenever I've done similar use to what I've done today with the iPhone or Samsung's latest flagships, or even the Pixel 7 Pro, they run out of battery fairly quickly too. My experience with this phone today has been... Okay, back to the studio guys, because the mic was pretty bad in Birmingham New Street Station. In fairness, it was incredibly loud in there, so I won't mark it down for that. But in summary, it's really straightforward. I haven't tried the competition for this phone, so treat this video as just part of your research. Please go and look at the other options. But for £200, I think it's a pretty good deal. The camera takes some fantastic photos in the right conditions. The performance is manageable. It's slowed down occasionally, but again, I kept thinking this isn't a £1,200, £1,500 flagship smartphone. The TCL 40R 5G gets a thumbs up actually. I'm looking forward to trying some more in the future, I think. But if you want to see what happens at the other end of the scale, keep watching for a link to my video where I compare the iPhone 14 Pro Max and the Samsung S23 Ultra, because that is really interesting.